Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Welcome. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The Alberta Day of Caring for Jasper has raised millions of dollars to support those impacted by devastating wildfires. Federal Tory leader Pierre Poilievre continued his cross-Canada tour and today spoke about his party's plan to fight inflation. And we hear from TBN Israel correspondent Yair Pinto, who says Israel is awaiting retaliation following the elimination of two more terrorist leaders with Hamas and Hezbollah.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. According to the Canadian Red Cross, Alberta Day of Caring for Jasper has raised more than $674,000. Now you combine that along with the federal and provincial government's matching, more than $1.5 million has been raised for the campaign. As for the 2024 Alberta wildfires appeals, more than $7.8 million has been raised so far. The donated funds will be used to support those affected by the wildfires here in our province. Now, locally here in Lethbridge, Ability Resource in our city has also joined in on the fundraiser. The group's Director of Operations, Dale Williams, discusses how much was raised at one of the Lethbridge locations.
For our RT depots, we've raised close to $4,000 so far. We're accepting donations right through into the end of the day on Saturday. And we also have cash donation boxes that are in our depots as well, and we have not counted that yet either. So we'll be higher than that. Just if people have not brought their bottles in, there's still time to either Ability Bottle Depots or to the other depots in town. Reach out and donate what you can.
Officials are working to let residents of Jasper tour the fire-ravaged community by bus. They say people will only be allowed to return once it's safe to do so. The evacuation order for the town and national park are still in effect. The fire situation is still quite volatile in the region. Parks Canada says the fire in the park is expected to become more active soon due to the warm, dry weather. It's estimated to be around 320 square kilometers in size. Now, speaking of wildfires, Alberta Wildfire says there are currently 116 wildfires burning here in the province. There are 18 burning in the Peace River Forest area and 17 in the Fort McMurray Forest area. Emergency officials say fortunately 48% are now under control, while around 36% are being held. There are still 18 wildfires burning that are out of control. Meanwhile, in British Columbia, there are currently 323 active wildfires, with 121 fires deemed as out of control. Around 40% are under control, while 23% of the blazes are being held. Well, fortunately, no fires here in our region in southwestern Alberta, but it has been very dry and hot, and a little bit of haze from the wildfire smoke. Jeanette Rocher is now with an early peek at the forecast. Jeanette, we may see a bit of a reprieve from the sizzling hot temperatures, but not until what, Sunday or maybe even holiday Monday?
Yeah, temperatures expected to moderate by Sunday, but until then, at least here in southern Alberta, expect that mercury to remain between 29 and 36 degrees Celsius. And you know what? The evening's not bringing much relief in sight either, as we're looking at an overnight low tonight of 14 degrees, overnight on Saturday night, 15 degrees with that daytime high of 33 degrees and a humidex value of 35, which means some level of discomfort, especially if you're exerting yourself. So maybe don't take that extra long jog tonight or tomorrow. Maybe hold off until Sunday or Monday or even next week when it's supposed to get considerably cooler. And I'll be back later in the show to give you all those details.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. Federal Tory leader Pierre Poilievre continued his cross-Canada tour, visiting homeowners and businesses. Now, when one recent stop, workers at one business asked him about his plan to tackle high inflation. This was his response.
High taxes, deficits, high interest rates are all symptoms. The disease is overspending. When governments spend too much money, there's only three ways to get it. One is to raise your taxes, the other is to borrow, which means that they'll tax you more later on. And the third way is to print money. Now, printing money seems like a painless way to pay for things, but it's very simple. If you have 10 apples and $10 in the economy, it's a bucket apple. If you double the number of dollars in the economy to 20, you still only have 10 apples. You're not twice as rich, it's just that each apple costs twice as much. And that is a tax on the working people because it chews up the purchasing power of your paycheck. only to pay for excessive government spending, and it balloons the asset values of the billionaires. So it's a real transfer from the have-nots to the have-yachts.
The push to purchase electric vehicles continues by many governments around the world, including our very own. Now, there's talk that the Trudeau government wants to phase out the sale of gas-powered cars by the year 2035. But how feasible is this, and can the average Canadian afford the cost of an EV? What about the cost of electricity when charging that electric vehicle? To chat about this in more detail is Chris Sims, who's the Alberta Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. She's joining us from a holiday location in Hope, British Columbia. Chris, you've crunched the numbers. Does it make sense for all of us to purchase EVs moving forward? I mean, they're great for the environment, as in less emissions, right?
Well, we're not so sure about that, right? Because, of course, this is what the government is telling us to do, but we actually don't have the data to show that it's any better for the environment. We just have to look at our example with the carbon tax. It's not reducing emissions, it's not helping global emissions, but it's making everybody a whole lot poorer. Now, if we get right down into the numbers of these EVs, though, it's really troubling because we don't have the money and we don't have the energy for this. Money-wise, if everybody went out this year who would otherwise have purchased a new car, so average rate of new car purchases across Canada, if we all did that, the rebate cost itself would be about $8 billion. It's a shocking amount of money.
Certainly is. Now, what about the strain on our electricity grid and seeing our power bills increase?
Yeah, this is a really big deal. So if you take a look at the taxpayer cost right up front, right, there's the sticker price difference. It's about $10,000 difference for an average gasoline powered, like a Nissan type sedan versus an electricity powered Nissan type sedan. So that's just sticker shock right there at the car dealership. It's around 10 grand difference. Then we get into something like actual power usage. So folks across Canada may not realize this, but here in Alberta, we regularly get these warnings saying, everybody, don't use your toaster. Don't plug in your hairdryer because we're at risk of blacking out the grid, meaning we don't have spare electricity to go around. Hal, if everyone in Alberta had an electric car and we charged it, we would need 3 new nuclear plants just to do that. It's an amazing amount of power, and nobody's building them. They take around 10 years to build, and they cost $15 billion each.
Thanks so much, Chris. That was Chris Sims, Alberta Director of the CTF, joining us from a vacation location in Hope, British Columbia. More Hamas and Hezbollah leaders have been assassinated by the Israel Defense Forces. According to TBN Israel correspondent Yair Pinto, Israel is awaiting retaliation by the terrorist group Hezbollah following the recent attack by the IDF.
Faoud Shukar's assassination in the Dahia district of Beirut is also very serious, as he was one of Hezbollah's senior leaders who had been active in the organization for decades. The United States had an open offer of $5 million to anyone who could assist in apprehending this evil man, as he was suspected of involvement in the attack on the United States Embassy and the United States Marine Barracks in Beirut all the way back in 1983. In any event, the last 24 hours carried one of the most important events in Israel's war against terrorism. Late on Tuesday evening, it was announced that an Israeli force strike on Beirut had taken out Faoud Shukar. A few hours later, at approximately 2 a.m. local time, the house in Tehran where Hania was staying was hit by a missile, which resulted in his elimination along with one of his bodyguards. Hamas officially confirmed Hania's death and immediately blamed Israel, as did the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps. Condemnations of Israel came from Iran, Hezbollah, Russia, and even Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. However, a statement from the White House merely said that the United States is aware of the assassination, and U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said it would assist in defending Israel from any Iranian retaliation.
The Alberta Serious Incident Response Team is investigating an officer-involved shooting in Medicine Hat. Now, back on July 27th, police received a 911 call from someone who said they heard a gunshot coming from a suite at an apartment building in the 200 block of 8th Street Southwest. When police arrived, they evacuated several residents from the building. And while they were standing at the front entrance, a gun was fired from the suite, injuring several of the officers. Police immediately returned gunfire, injuring the gunman, who was taken to hospital with gunshot wounds. Police provided a picture of the firearm that was recovered from within the apartment building. A 33-year-old woman and a 39-year-old man have received prison sentences for failing to provide the necessaries of life for their infant. In November of last year, Child and Family Services received a report of the child, who was 3 weeks old at the time, being taken to the hospital with a broken arm. When Lethbridge police investigated the incident, they found the arm was broken as a result of significant force. The man received 1 count each of failing to provide the necessaries of life and public mischief and will serve 3 years behind bars. As for the woman, she received 2 counts of failing to provide the necessaries of life and 1 count of public mischief. She has less than 350 days left on her sentence in prison, including time already served. No names are being mentioned to protect the identity of the child involved. You know, many of us would like to know that no one ever needs shelter, but the reality is these emergency centers are a big support for many of our most vulnerable. As BCN's Heidi Echevarria explains now, it's not just those who are battling addictions, who are also battling homelessness.
Shelter, an emergency service that offers a safe place to sleep. Those who are fighting addictions are the ones who are using these spaces the most.
Majority of people that do access our services do have substance use, and they can have also underlying mental health concerns that may or may not be diagnosed or addressed, which makes things very difficult for them. We do also see other people, so we see people that maybe have lost their job, have lost their house recently, that are really struggling to make ends meet, that don't have substance use or addictions.
Why are so many people homeless?
The opioid crisis that was declared in 2014, so that really sped up the need for shelter services just because there was a lot of substance use and addictions that were contributing to people losing their jobs, losing their homes, not being able to connect anymore with their family, not being able to connect anymore with their community. In addition to the economy and the cost of living these days, it's very difficult for people who are making minimum wage, who are working a few jobs, maybe just struggling a little bit, and then something happens and they find themselves unhoused or out of work, that type of thing.
Susan Buchanan, director of the Lethbridge Wellness Shelter Stabilization Unit, says the shelter offers its service 24/7, 360 days a year. She says the shelter works together with the community.
If they need housing, how do we go about connecting them to resources? If they need medical care, how do we connect them to resources? If they would like to do substance use and addictions or mental health services, where can we connect them best for their situation within the community? So community services are very essential to what we do and an integrated part of the services we provide.
The Interfaith Food Bank and Soup Kitchen are also on the list. The Alberta government and the city of Lethbridge are also helping out, approving $5.4 million to offer better services.
This shelter will almost double the capacity of the shelter capacity that we have here in Lethbridge. It will be able to put more resources into the shelter and connect better to the other partnerships that we need inside this community to really work on this challenge together.
This expansion project is just a real exciting time. It's a good time, and it's a way to continue to provide the best services for people that need to access them.
For Bridge City News, I'm Heidi Echevarria.
Well, today was Free Potato Friday at the Lethbridge Food Bank. Now, earlier this afternoon, anyone could drive up and receive a free box or bag of potatoes. The food bank held the event after receiving around 13,000 pounds of spuds from local producers. The windfall was more than the food bank could utilize or store for its clients. Ultimately, staff decided to give the excess potatoes away as a way of thanking the community for the support it receives. Now, the food bank also had some fresh berries on hand that they gave away at the event as well. Now, in return, many of those that stopped by left donations of food and cash to support our local food bank. In the wake of another heat wave, the city of Lethbridge is reminding locals of ways to stay hydrated by tapping into water at various locations here in the city. The Blue W Initiative is a community-based program that offers free drinking water at local businesses and public spaces here in Lethbridge. Residents can walk into participating businesses and request to fill their water bottles with any available water the business owner provides. The city is extending the call for businesses in the area to sign up by filling out an online form on the city's website or by emailing them directly. The city also has installed 4 public drinking stations earlier this summer at Galt Gardens, Henderson Lake Park, Nicholas Sharon Park, and Legacy Park. 3 local students are the recipients of some cold hard cash thanks to Lethbridge County's annual post-secondary bursary program. Rayan Kampmans, Danica Hodge, and Vanessa Moorhead each received $1,500. The funds were a reward for meeting their educational achievements and community involvement or volunteer efforts. Applicants within the county were required to submit an essay outlining their high school careers along with plans for the future. Congratulations going out to all the recipients. You know, with a long weekend in sight, many of us are planning to head out to the mountains. Well, we've got some great outdoor tips for you coming up later in the program. Joey Ambrosi is a nature writer. He's written books on hiking and fishing in the beautiful Canadian Rockies. Ambrosi says when heading out to the backcountry, a key tool you may need is bear spray.
Bear spray, which has come along in the last 20 years, is a good thing to have. The thing to remember with bear spray, I learned that, of course, it's good from about 2 to 5 feet away. So it's a last resort. I've heard stories of people who think bear spray is like mosquito spray and you put it on yourself and you spray yourself with pepper spray, but that's not the way that works. And if you're spraying something that's 20 or 30 feet away, it probably blows away in the wind and doesn't do anything. It's kind of a last resort and it will work.
Make sure you catch the full interview with nature writer Joey Ambrosi and BCN's Naveen Day coming up after Business News. Well, it should be a beautiful weekend for heading out to the mountains. Make sure you take your bear spray and look at how the long weekend is shaping up. Is coming up shortly. The heat warning continued from Environment Canada today. It was hot, but not record-breaking hot here in Lethbridge. Jeanette Rocher is in now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, how close were we to breaking a record today?
Yeah, well, we were off by a few degrees there, Hal. To break the record on this day, we would have had to get over 36.1 degree. That was the record that was reached back in 1971. Not to take away from the fact that it is still warm and it will remain so over the next couple of days, or particularly Saturday, as we still are under that heat warning at 33 for the high there with a humidex value of 35. And then Sunday, we're going to drop a little bit more into 27 degrees, which is still higher than average for this time of year, mainly cloudy skies. Now, keep this in mind if you are camping this weekend. We could expect some showers. Overnight rain on Sunday night, 60% chance, and then a bit of showers into Monday as well. Could see a 30% chance of showers, high 27 degrees. As we move into Monday night, 60% chance of showers, then mainly cloudy skies on Tuesday, and we're going to see that drastic drop there in temperature, down 5 degrees from Monday. So on Tuesday, looking at a high of 22 degrees, dropping even more on Wednesday down to 19. Could see some shower activity back on Wednesday, and then rounding out that 7-day forecast with a high of 21 degrees. So we're going to see a major drop. So we're going from the 30s straight to the low 20s, even the high teens. Average high for this time of year is 26 degrees, average low 11. 36, like I said before, that was the high temperature. That was our record on this day. It happened back in 1971. And in 99, we saw the chilliest, which was a record 5 degrees for this day. Sun rose this morning at 6:04, sunset tonight at 9:10. We're looking at just over 15 hours of daylight, 2 minutes shorter than we saw yesterday. Okay, mainly sunny one on the coast tomorrow, 25 for the high in Victoria and Vancouver. Edmonton sitting at 26 degrees. Could see some showers tomorrow, along with risk of thunderstorms late in the afternoon. Same thing for Calgary. Calgary was still under that heat warning. Things are about to change, though. High of 28 tomorrow in Calgary, and could also see that risk of thunderstorms later on in the day. Now, in the rest of the prairies, 24 for the high in Saskatoon. Could see a 30% chance of showers there. Both Winnipeg and Regina coming in at a high of 24 degrees tomorrow, with mix of sun and cloud in Regina, mainly cloudy skies, though, in Winnipeg. Now, as we get to the central part of the country, some of these cities were still sitting under that hot air mass, the high humidity levels, and of course, high humidity sometimes can bring that moisture, and that's exactly what's happening in these areas. Could see that 30% chance of showers and risk of thunderstorms late in the day. High of 30 in Toronto and Ottawa. Montreal coming in at a high of 31 degrees tomorrow. As we move on over into the Maritimes, same thing. We have seen those high heat indexes. Things are about to start to get a little bit more moderate over the weekend, though. 27 for the high in Fredericton and Halifax. 26 degrees tomorrow. Both of those cities could see that chance of showers, risks of thunderstorms as well. 28 for the high in Charlottetown and a high of 24 in St. John's, with mainly clear skies. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Auto sales in Canada this month bounced back after a flat June as dealerships were dealing with a major software outage. DeRosier Automotive Consultant says light vehicle sales were up 11% last month compared with 2023 levels. Overall, sales came in at 161,000 units sold. Company officials at DeRosier say they will be watching August sales closely for signs of stability in the marketplace. Video game maker Nintendo says there are around 128 million people using its popular Switch console, but still is not saying when it will share news of its successor system. As part of its quarterly earnings report, the Japanese company said more than 140 million consoles have been sold since its debut 8 years ago. While officials did not say when the next console will be unveiled, its president said an announcement will be made next April. Nintendo reported a 55% drop in its profits in its latest quarter, and sales declined around $1.7 billion US. Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was down 495 points today to 22,227. The Dow was down 610 points to 39,737. The S&P 500 was down 100 points to 5,346, and the Nasdaq was also down at 417 points to 16,776. West Texas Intermediate oil was down $2.79 to $73.52 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 7 cents to $1.96 US. Gold was down $11 to $2,469 US an ounce, and silver was down 8 cents to $28.39 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $7.57 per bushel, barley is at $5.79 per bushel, canola is at $13.90, and corn is at $7.19 per bushel. Live cattle August contract went down 70 cents to $184.10. Feeder cattle August contract went down $3.50 to $249.65, and lean hogs August contract was down 95 cents to $92.20. And the Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours at 72 cents US.
Recapping one of our top stories, emergency officials are working to let residents of Jasper tour the fire-ravaged community by bus. They say people will only be allowed to return once it's safe to do so. The evacuation order for the town and national park are still in effect. The fire situation is still quite volatile in the region. Parks Canada says the fire in the park is expected to become more active soon due to the hot, dry weather. It's estimated to be around 320 square kilometers in size. Joey Ambrosi is a nature writer who's been writing books on hiking and fishing in the Canadian Rockies. He'll share more with some of his adventures in a conversation with BCN's Naveen Day shortly. Listen, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also, be sure to check out our website anytime to see a number of stories and interviews.
There is so much to see in southern Alberta. It really is a haven for those who love to do road trips. Just to the west of Lethbridge is the Crow's Nest Pass, an area to enjoy the mountains and features that nature has for us. One local area man who has written a few books about Crow's Nest Pass and the natural wonders of the area is Joey Ambrosi. His books include Fishing the Canadian Rockies and Hiking Alberta's Southwest. Joey Ambrosi, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you very much.
So Joey, first off, tell us what put you on this path to write books about the natural environment in the Crow's Nest Pass area?
I was living in Calgary and I was working for the Sierra Club of Canada on some projects where we were just rehiking old trails that explorers had used just as a project. And then it kind of turned into a book by filling in the in-between trails. And that was a book, Hiking Alberta Southwest, came out in 1984. And I'm a fisherman. Everywhere I go, I fish. So in 1986, I did a book called Fly Fishing the Canadian Rockies. And then 1998, did an update on the hiking book. In 2001, update on the fishing book. And in 2011, update on the hiking book. And just last year was an update on the fishing book. So I get out and I do a lot of fishing and hiking.
Okay, so obviously you've been doing this for a while. Are there changes that you've seen in the natural environment, or have things kind of like stayed the same over the last 20 or 30 years?
I would think in the late 70s, 80s into the 90s, hiking was really big in the Rockies, including Banff, Jasper, and down here to the Crow's Nest Pass. And then it sort of died out. It didn't die out completely, but it sort of went into a little bit of a decline, but it's back on again. And I think COVID was one of the big reasons. I think people realized that they could go out in the woods, be by themselves or with their family and be safe and go fishing or go hiking or go mountain biking or go snowmobiling or go do what they want and be safe. And then I think in that way, a lot of people, Crow's Nest Pass especially, was new to them. So they came out here and they found one or two trails they liked, and they realized, wow, there's still another 40 or 50 trails that I haven't hiked yet. So they come out here regularly.
Do you feel in a way that the pandemic also attracted new people to the area? Because like we were always told to socially distance ourselves. So I mean, like, what better way to social distance than go hiking in the pass?
Yeah, part of it was people weren't supposed to go into British Columbia, and of course from there they go down to Montana. Crow's Nest Pass has always been a thoroughfare. People drive by on the highway and very few people stop. But when the restrictions were in, you still could go to BC, but it had to be for a specific reason. So a lot of people came down from Edmonton, Calgary, Lethbridge, wherever. They came down to Crow's Nest Pass. They looked at our COVID numbers, which were very good, and they realized they could do hiking or fishing or whatever they wanted to do. Plus, they could come up to the Frank Slide Interpretive Center, which was still open. And we had some restrictions on how many people in at a time and stuff. Then I think they came down here and they realized, wow, there's a lot more down there than I ever realized in terms of history, in terms of natural environment. There's all kinds of things. So I think people are coming back over the last few summers.
And there are a lot of Albertans that enjoy the public land use zones north and south of Crow's Nest Pass. So without giving away your favorite secret spots, are there some places that maybe aren't well known yet, but yet they're wonderful places to visit?
Yeah, when you write a fishing book or a hiking book, you give away all your secrets. You don't say that is the secret lake, but it's in there. So there's nothing that was kept out of any hiking book or any fishing book. So they're all in there. You just have to figure that out for yourself. But there is many, many wonderful fishing and hiking locations, all the way from Waterton up through Crow's Nest, even over into British Columbia, into Fernie and that area, and then northwards up towards Chain Lakes and places like that.
And I hear that there are caves that can be explored just south of Coleman. So tell us about those experiences and how far deep into these caves can you get?
To get into the main caves, you don't want to go in there unless you actually know what you're doing. So I'm not going to say where those ones are. You can go to the Environment Department and you can talk about, some of them are locked. Some of these are the longest caves in Canada.
Wow.
Gargantua Cave and Yorkshire Pot. And they go several kilometers underground. But there's been, over the last 20 years, that people have gone in without the right equipment. And obviously it's a cave and there's drop-offs and there's been rescues that have had to be undertaken in those caves. So it's not either for the faint of heart or for people with no experience. So we don't really advertise exactly where the caves are. The people who are in that, it's called spelunking, people are in that, like doing that, know where the caves are and they know how to get into them.
So if you want to explore the caves and you're a novice, you may want to hire a tour guide for those?
It's not even tour guide. You'd probably have to find somebody in the caving community who would be interested in taking you in on that.
Now, your first book, Fishing the Canadian Rockies, has been a popular one. What really caused you to want to put pen to paper about fishing in Alberta's mountains?
It's actually, it covers a lot of area. It goes from the American border to the north end of Jasper on both the BC and Alberta side. So it's about 1,100 lakes and rivers. I've been to almost 1,000 of them, I think, over the years. It started that when I was a child. I grew up in Invermere, British Columbia, and we fished every weekend with my mom and dad when I was a kid. Then I moved to Calgary, and so I did a lot in Banff and Jasper, and then later moved to the Crow's Nest Pass. And then just after a while, you realize, wow, I've covered all this area. If I take maybe one summer and fill in all the blank spots that I haven't been to, I do have enough for a book. So there was never an intention at the beginning to write a book. It was intention to go fishing. So I always have to tell my wife that I'm going to do some research.
So now, it has been said that the rivers and creeks of the eastern slopes of southern Alberta have some world-class fly fishing opportunities. Are there still creeks or rivers that stand out to you as excellent spots to go fly fishing or even regular cast fishing?
Yeah, both. I'm a fly fisherman myself. In this area, obviously, the Crow's Nest River is outstanding, and they've got new regulations, a lot more catch and release, so the fish get put back in the water, and you can catch them again, and they get bigger and bigger. So it's world class. A lot of the smaller streams are just fun. There's lots of fish to take children up, and you catch fish in a lot of the tributaries of the Crow's Nest River, but it's the main one here. Also, if you go a little bit to the south, the Castle and West Castle rivers, and a little bit to the north, the Old Man River, and all three of those go into the Old Man Dam, but those three are outstanding fly fishing rivers.
Can you talk about the different times of spring, summer, and fall where certain regions may be better for fishing than others? And are there certain areas that maybe you recommend in July and August versus early spring or September or October?
Yeah, obviously all the lakes freeze over here. So there is ice fishing. I'm not an ice fisherman, but there's a few lakes where you can ice fish. In the spring, when the ice goes off, it's usually pretty good fishing in most of the lakes around here. Early season, when it gets too warm, the fish tend to go deeper because it's cooler water down below. So the lakes that work better in the hot seasons are the deeper lakes, but you have to usually have a boat or something to get out there and fish a little bit deeper. The fall, they start to come back up again, and good fishing in the fall. So spring and fall are the best times. Summer, you still catch fish around there. There's lots of lakes where you catch lots of fish.
Now, I think one of the features of southwestern Alberta is we can get into places where cell phones don't always work or may be unreliable. And that may be part of the attraction of spending time in the wildlands of our province. But what are some of the safety things that hikers and adventurers or explorers should keep in mind when they're out in the backcountry or the public land use zones?
Sure. One thing in the Crow's Nest Pass is there is a lot of old discontinued roads. So a lot of times you're hiking on roads and it's fairly easy to follow. If you get off the roads, usually there's not much of a trail. If you're down in Waterton National Park, they have very good trails with trailheads and tells you how far you're going and how long it's going to take to get there and that kind of thing. In this area, the main things probably you have to watch out for is sort of the natural hazards in terms of crossing large rivers. When there's high water, you better know what you're doing. You should be able to read a map because your GPS system probably won't work out where you are. The other thing, obviously, is bears. Bears, should be a lot of respect for bears, grizzly and black bear. I've seen hundreds of bears in my time, black and grizzly.
And
I never
cougars
had
too?
Pardon?
And cougars too?
I have seen cougars, but not in the backcountry. I've seen them driving out to go to a hike. Cougars are very nocturnal and quite difficult to see in the backcountry. Bears, a little more, but the further you get away from human activity, the more they act like they're supposed to, and they run away when they see you. If they're in towns and around garbage and that's their food source, they're very protective of that. So the good thing is experience. You can't always get the experience right away. So there's a lot of really good books on bear behavior and what to do. Bear spray, which has come along in the last 20 years, is a good thing to have. The thing to remember with bear spray, I learned at a course, it's good from about 2 to 5 feet away. So it's a last resort. I've heard stories of people who think bear spray is like mosquito spray and you put it on yourself and you spray yourself with pepper spray, but that's not the way that works. And if you're spraying something that's 20 or 30 feet away, it probably blows away in the wind and doesn't do anything. It's kind of a last resort and it will work. sort of stop the bear in his track, has trouble breathing and seeing, and you've got about half an hour to get away from there. So bear spray, read about it, learn how it's used, and it's a good thing. But if you make lots of noise, bears generally stay away from you. But the more experience you have in the backcountry, the better it is.
Now, your second book is on hiking Alberta's Southwest. What caused you to want to put that collection of hikes together?
Again, that was through the Sierra Club. We went to all the historic trails that the Palliser expedition had been over, and all the early explorers. And I recall going to seniors' homes and doing slideshows to show them this and show them maps. And then we thought maybe we should put that into a book. And so from Hiking Alberta Southwest, the more recent version, which is still about 10 years old, is called the Southern Rockies Trail Guide, and hoping to do a revision perhaps next summer.
Now, there's definitely some interesting areas and things to see in Southwest Alberta. There's Drywood Falls, which is a great spot, and there's also the wreck of the RCAF plane. Is there a hike or maybe a couple of hikes that really stand out in your mind as to not to be missed?
Yeah, the one to the plane, the 1946, we called it the plane crash, and it was outside Crow's Nest Pass. If you have horses or you have a quad, you can basically get right up to the plane crash. But most people hike in, and that's about a 5 to 6 kilometer hike on an old road, and it goes up, and you can see the remains of the plane actually on the ground, which is kind of neat. And there's a memorial right there at the site.
Wow. Now, what about hikes for the first-time explorers, or maybe people who bring children along, or adults that haven't really been out exploring? What would you recommend?
The simplest ones in the Crow's Nest Pass. If you come up to the Frank Slide Interpretive Center, we have a 1.5 kilometer hike that goes through the rocks, starting from the parking lot, goes through, comes to the other end of the parking lot. It's a wonderful hike. And you get a little brochure. There's numbers along the trail, so you know what you're looking at. That's a really good one. There's one called the Miner's Path in Coleman, which is part of the Crow's Nest Pass. And it's another one goes along a little creek. There's Star Creek Falls is a nice little hike. If you're camping in the area, maybe up at Chinook Lake, there's a hike that goes around the lake up there. If you're getting a little more adventurous, going up Turtle Mountain, there's a trail that goes up to the top of Turtle Mountain, which overlooks the Frank Slide. It's a trail all the way. There's no actual climbing, but it's uphill all the way. So you want to be in reasonable shape, but kids can go up there as well. I wouldn't do that as your first hike. There's a ghost town called Lille that you can start from the interpretive center, and it's about a 6 kilometer hike into there. And that's pretty cool as well.
That sounds really cool. One of the features of life today, of course, though, is social media. And on different social media sites, you can find pictures and videos of people exploring our province. Is there a place where our viewers could go if they want to learn more about not only your books, but also the region around Crow's Nest Pass, and where they could actually take the family camping and exploring?
Yeah. I'm not an IT guy myself, so but if you go to the Frank Slide Interpretive Center website, that will get you started. I would really recommend, if you come into the area, come up to the center. We can tell you all about the heritage in the area. There's all kinds of things. The Hillcrest Mine Disaster Memorial Site, and there's the Bellevue Underground Mine, and there was the Alberta Police Barracks where there was a shootout in 1922, and there's all those kind of things. But we can also direct you. We have maps and everything of all the hikes in the Crow's Nest Pass. The Crow's Nest municipality of Crow's Nest Pass has a website, and you can link to that. And they talk about where you can go mountain biking, where you go hiking as well. So those are some of the links you can go to.
So at the Frank Slide Interpretive Center, you see a lot of like first-time visitors to the area, and there's resources for them to go hiking or go exploring or check out different mountains or different attractions then.
Absolutely. Most of our staff hikes and does everything. So it's earlier in the spring when the snow is just melting, we can tell you which trails still have snow on them and which ones don't. But we get not only first timers, get returning people who've hiked a hike or two and want to know what's a little bit more challenging, or where can I go next, or I want to see a nice lake, or I want to see a nice waterfall, all those kind of things.
Well, Joey, that is all the time we have for today. We thank you so much for joining us and telling us all about what you can explore in the Crow's Nest Pass.
My pleasure.
If someone brought up the term Tourette syndrome, what kinds of things would come to mind? Most of us probably don't really know a lot about it, but today we are going to learn a bit more about this disorder. And Jerry Firth joins us from Lethbridge. He is the coordinator of the annual Trek for Tourette fundraiser, which just occurred a couple weeks ago in Lethbridge. So he's here in Lethbridge. Welcome to Bridge City News, Jerry. Great to have you on. And I understand that fundraiser took place at Legacy Park, and it was quite successful.
Yes, thank you. Pleasure to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit more about Tourette syndrome.
Of course. Okay, so maybe let's find out, first of all, what your connection is with Tourette syndrome. Is this something that you yourself have been diagnosed with, or perhaps someone close to you?
Yeah, our oldest child, who's now the age of, well, almost 17 now, was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome at the age of 6. Myself and our youngest child also have tics, which is the most common trait within Tourette syndrome, but it's a part of a host of what would be known as tic disorder. Neither of us have been formally diagnosed, at least not at this point. We also have other individuals in our life that we know that live with and are affected by Tourette syndrome.
Okay, so what kind of a disease is this, and what are the symptoms? You did mention the tics there.
Yeah, so Tourette syndrome is a neurological disorder, which means it affects the brain and other nerves within the body. So this disorder involves repetitive and involuntary movements movements and sounds known as tics. It's part of a group of tic disorders and is the most severe of these types of disorders.
Okay, so can you maybe describe what some of these various types of tics, what these symptoms sort of look like?
Certainly. So tics present differently for everyone. It can range on a scale of severity from minor to rather large and uncontrollable. Movements can be present in any part of the body. That would include the face, neck, arms, legs, and so on. It could include things like flinching, twisting, flinging, among other movements. The vocalizations could include things like humming, grunting, coughing, and vocalizing certain words or phrases. For example, with our child, humming is something that's quite present for them. And they also have various words or phrases that they might repeat. They have an arm flinch that they do when they flick out their arm to the side. But of course, throughout the development of Tourette syndrome that they've been living with, their tics have changed and morphed. For myself, for example, I also have most of my tics happen in my face. I also have a bit of a shoulder roll or a shoulder shuffle. You might actually end up seeing that at various times within this interview. And then when I'm often preoccupied with watching TV or something, I will do a ticking noise with my mouth. And so, like I said, it's different for everyone and can look and sound different. And those tics can change throughout the lifetime.
Yeah, you mentioned the change there. Is this something that can gradually increase over time, or does it more decrease? Does it affect younger people more than older people? Do you grow out of it ever?
Yeah, good question. So it typically does change, and the more it's more common with children. People into the adulthood can live with Tourette syndrome, but often it does decrease, and in many cases, it can actually even go away in time. That's not true for everyone, but I would say that it's more severe among young people.
Okay, all right. Now, we often see Tourette syndrome depicted in the movies as people who maybe like swear uncontrollably. That's kind of what it's known for. But how much reality is there to that?
Certainly, yeah. So movies and other popular media often depict Tourette syndrome on the higher end of severity. The uncontrollable swearing is often known as what's called, see if I get the term right, coprolalia. In reality, only about 10% of people impacted by Tourette syndrome display vocal tics that would consist of things such as the socially inappropriate cussing or swearing. This depiction, unfortunately, can be incredibly harmful and continues to provide the misconceptions of what Tourette syndrome is.
Yeah, no, for sure, definitely. Now, are people with Tourette's are completely aware of the tics that are occurring, or do they try to stop them from happening?
Yeah, I would say for the most part, there is some awareness. I would say specifically amongst the more severe tics, they're pretty hard to be missed by anyone, including the individual. There are times though where it becomes a bit of a normal function, and you may not acknowledge or recognize them, and others who are familiar with you also may not acknowledge them. And as I had mentioned earlier, that some of them can look like normal actions or behaviors by an individual, so they might go unnoticed by others and themselves. Unfortunately, though, some of the more severe tics can be quite uncomfortable and painful even at times. For example, our child has one where they thump their chest pretty hard, and that can be quite hurtful for them. So those types of tics obviously are ones that they're quite aware of. But like I said, they are uncontrollable and involuntary. So um, there are times that you can work to try to suppress them, but that can be very difficult for most.
How common is this disease, and does it impact one gender more than the other?
Sure. Uh, so tic disorders. So Tourette syndrome is a part of a group of tic disorders, and tic disorders affect about 1 in 100 children, and Tourette syndrome is more around 1 in 160. It tends to affect males more than females. I think it's a 3-in-1 ratio to a 4-in-1 ratio, somewhere around there. Um, uh, and it shows up and presents differently amongst males and females in some ways as well.
Interesting. Like in what way?
Just with regard to well, when it presents itself, males typically end up presenting a little bit earlier in life than females, and um, there are more prevalence with some of the motor tics.
I understand. Okay. What age group does it typically affect? I know you mentioned you've got young kids even that have it. Does it usually start pretty young?
Yeah, so the first signs of Tourette syndrome usually occur between the ages of about 5 and 10. Now, they can occur as early as the age of 12 or even later, up to the age of 18, is when you might still first start seeing tics occur. They usually start out pretty mild in nature, often with the head, neck, or face, and then later present throughout other parts of the body, and the severity can increase over time as well. But yes, usually in younger ages is when it starts, and and as I mentioned, you can eventually start to grow out of them, and most people do, whereas they might live with it for their life.
Wow. Do you know how many people have been diagnosed with this in southern Alberta or in the Lethbridge area?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think there's any stats available for this particularly, at least nothing that I could find that was accessible. But if we can imagine 1 in about 160 children being affected, I'm not sure exactly where we are with the population of children, but at 100,000 plus people in Lethbridge, I would say there's probably 300 individuals that are likely affected or living with TS.
Wow, incredible. So what do we know about the cause of Tourette syndrome? Is it genetic, or can the environment around us sort of contribute to it?
Certainly. Yes. So the exact cause itself is unknown. They continue to do research around this area and have not yet found any direct correlation. There are both genetic and environmental effects that then can play a role with Tourette syndrome. We do know that it is pretty common within families, so genetics do play a role, and it can be intergenerational. Now, with it, because there's no real understanding of the cause, there's also currently no cure for Tourette syndrome. However, there are certain treatments that can include things like medication, relaxation techniques, and psychotherapy.
Okay, well, that at least brings some sort of relief, hopefully. Is Tourette syndrome in any way associated with ADHD or OCD?
Yes. So it's actually, well, the term would be that's often used as comorbidity, but certainly Tourette syndrome is often accompanied by any of those other neurological disorders, whether it be attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, oppositional defiance disorder, or OCD itself. And so each of those might create new dynamics or have different effects or impacts on how TS might be present, and then also create some other complexities and complications as a result.
Wow. Obviously, it has impact on the individual themselves, but what about what type of impact would it have on the family unit?
Yeah, certainly. So again, I think it would often depend on the individuals who are affected by Tourette syndrome and how the other neurological disorders that they might experience would impact their lives. This could have an effect on behavioral attributes, academics, social behaviors, etc. So it would very much depend on many factors in that way. Um, but I think that a lot of the challenges that come with it is because it's such a misunderstood diagnosis that there's also often a lot of social stigma. Plus, there's also minimal resources available to individuals and families affected. With that social stigma that exists as well, it can also feel like often an isolated experience for the individual and families. And so, uh, again, it would range, but I can speak from our family experience. It's been an incredible journey of many highs and lows, and some often very difficult conversations and some difficult interactions and engagements, both with our child and ourselves, but also with the professionals and other resources that we try to interact and engage with, often trying to explore pathways for the success of our child.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I'm sure it hasn't been an easy road for sure, but hopefully it's brought you together a little bit closer as a family.
In many ways, it has, especially around us taking on a lead in coordinating the Trek for Tourette. It's something that when we first started as a family, shortly after our child was diagnosed, um, it gave us a sense of community where we weren't the only ones that were living with a child affected by TS, and also help us to better just explore and have conversations about what does it mean to live with TS, and have conversations with others in our lives as well, our family and friends, about what that might look like and mean.
Right. Speaking of which, is there, like, what type of help is there out there for kids who struggle with self-esteem from this stigma surrounding TS?
Yeah, certainly. So there are some professional supports that exist locally. Of course, there's some common things around accessing counseling services. We are fortunate enough to be able to have access to that with our child at a very young age through AHS, Child and Youth Mental Health Supports. There's also a local physician who's a pediatrics um, neurologist. And then we also have access to a psychologist, a psychiatrist. And so a lot of those professional supports have been wonderful. We have looked at and explored other potential supports in Calgary at the Children's Hospital there, where they have specialization in Tourette syndrome. But of course, the travel it creates and poses its own challenges. Uh, but of course, we've been fortunate as a family to be within schools that have been incredibly helpful and supportive. However, again, with the Tourette syndrome being rather misunderstood and just unfamiliar for most people, that the school setting has probably been one of the greatest challenges to try to explore and navigate.
Yeah, I can imagine. With that said, any advice for schoolmates as to how to respond or interact with a fellow student who might have TS?
Certainly, yeah, and I appreciate this question. So, our child, shortly after they were diagnosed, we encouraged them to share about what Tourette syndrome is and what it means to them and how they live with it, so that there can be this familiarity with it. Really, I think if if anything, it's important that people understand that the movements and vocalizations are involuntary. Most people who are living with TS um, struggle with the perception when they might be seen as being interruptive. So I think it's important not just for the classmates, but for the teachers to also know that there's no intention in that area. And there are things that can be done to help in those situations. One, not just the understanding, but also sometimes stress can induce tics. So if a student is struggling in a setting and tics are being set off by their stress levels, to just provide another space for them, perhaps some quiet space for a while. Also, maybe make some accommodations so that they're able to do some learning or some of their exams at a different time or a different location. So it would depend on the individual, but I think it's really just about having understanding and starting some conversations about what are the needs to help be supportive for the individual, but obviously not in a way that's going to create more burden or challenges for the school, but rather create some partnership where everyone can benefit.
Yeah, definitely good advice there. And, education is always the best tool. But it looks like we're out of time. But thanks so much, Jerry, for being with us for this very informative discussion on Tourette's syndrome. And all the best to you and your family, of course.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It was wonderful to be here, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, of course. Jerry Firth is the coordinator of the annual Trek for Tourette fundraiser for the Lethbridge Tourette Group. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.